On Magna Carta, you go through it section by section. What you see is a massive focus on what's due process. Um, you know, back before this all began, which begins about 60 years before we get to Magna Carta. Um, if, say, somebody killed your cousin, you had a right to kill them. And then your cousin's family had a right to kill you. And then your family had a right to kill whoever killed you, and so on and so forth. Some of these things, some of these feuds sometimes went on for 60 years or more. A lot of crimes, in fact, even murder, even homicide, you could get out of by paying a certain amount of money. But if you didn't have that amount of money, it might be, let's take it out back. So, to put it gently, law and the application of law coming out of the early Middle Ages was really a mess. There just wasn't a regular process or processes to handle problems with lawsuits, civil suits, different crimes. And as I say, this really is the heart. This is the red thread that runs through Magna Carta. Is how do we end up with a rational, sensible, regular way to handle the law? First off, you begin with the right. It says, Article 40, to no one will we sell. I think we can understand that. You don't want to have to pay for justice. To no one deny, and that's completely obvious. And no one delay right or justice. That delay thing, what does that mean? Why is that important? Why is that in here with the other two? And the reality is, of course, is that justice delayed is justice denied. Let's assume that I had a student who didn't like me, and they charged me with sexual harassment. Okay, let's just assume that. Now, I can prove that on the date and time at which the incident supposedly occurred, I was out of the state. I was at a conference or something like that. So I can clear my name, no problem, except for one thing. What happens if I can't get into court for 2 or 3 years? Do you have any idea what the administration of most colleges would do? They'd find a reason to fire me. If and can you imagine as I walk down the halls of my school, what all the talk that would be going on? And you might even end up with pickets around your house. Certainly back in the medieval period, even in the high Middle Ages, which is what we're dealing with, violence occurred on a too regular basis, you might say. So certainly you wanted to get your name cleared as fast as you could, or you want to plead guilty, and hopefully get into somebody else's hands. You get that off your back. But justice delayed is justice denied, and that's a fundamental principle of law. Okay, so suppose you have a lawsuit, you want to sue someone, and suppose that you wanted to, or maybe you wanted to respond to a lawsuit. Wouldn't it be nice to know where to go? Well, if the lawsuit travels with the king or his justiciar, essentially chief justice, if the lawsuit travels, you might not be able to catch up to them. You might not be able to find them for months in order to file your lawsuit or to respond. And of course, all kinds of bad things can happen during that period of time. So you have a fixed place. That's why we have county courthouses. That if you're going to file a lawsuit or you're going to respond to a lawsuit, you know where to go. And we don't think of that as being an important right, but it is an important right. And certainly says something about how people want to have a regular access to justice. There was the right to determine legal possession. And that's, as I have here on the slide, as opposed to seizing the land or an office by force. And Article 18 of Magna Carta reads, in crest of novel decision, Mort d'ancestor and Darien presentment shall be taken only in their proper county court. What is noval disseisin? Someone who has lost their property can ask the courts to determine if the loss is proper. I'm sitting here in a house that was built in 1900. We probably have a pretty good idea who owns this title. I do. But suppose you were in a newly built suburb or subdivision or something like that. There could be dispute over who actually owns the land. So, you want to make certain that you have the proper county court. And there have been many, many cases where somebody sues or responds to a lawsuit in the wrong court, and it screws things up terribly. Mort d'ancestor. Okay, in terms of inheritance, it's a court inquiry to determine who was last in possession of some land. So, somebody dies and fellow says, well, the courts say, no, who controlled this land last? Ownership's a little fuzzy in those days. Who controlled this land last? And, 3 people say, I did. Well, then now you got to have somebody figure this out. And so this becomes part of the regular everyday duties of the court to determine who actually owned or controlled that land last. And then Darien presentment. And if a dispute shall arise, this is from Henry II, if a dispute shall arise concerning avowson and presentation of churches, let it be treated and concluded in the court of the king. So this really went to church things. Somebody who was a benefactor to a church would have the right to present, they would advow that this candidate is good for a particular position, and they would present that person to the bishop. Now, of course, somebody who's paying a lot of money to the court would probably get a pretty good hearing and have a good chance. But the question is who has that right? That might seem very fuzzy and something which we wouldn't consider, but we wouldn't even think about. But of course, even today, churches can be influenced in terms of the appointment of positions by benefactors. I mean, that's just the way it works. Colleges work that way. But in those days, there was a legal recourse since this was a recognized practice, you had legal recourse. Nowadays, we say that benefactors, meddling in things to get jobs is somehow a little tacky, more off the books in a manner of speaking. But in those days, it was accepted that somebody who gave a lot of money or land or something to a church had a right to at least say to the bishop, this is my candidate. I think you should consider them. And generally, of course, that candidate got appointed. In fact, there could be trouble if there wasn't. So you have a legal application, legal process to decide who has the right to, what benefactor has the right to make a presentment for a particular office. The regularity and dependability of justice. This, of course, is very important. This is a continuation of Article 18. We ourselves, that would be the king, or in our absence abroad, our chief justice, that would be the justiciar, will send 2 justices to each county 4 times a year. So courts meet without the king's judges being present. But there's always cases where you have to wait for the king's judges, the king's law, to decide a particular issue. This is how Anglo-American law, this is how law in English-speaking parts of the world, English-influenced parts of the world built up. It's a case by case. And so essentially, you have 2 nights to go to each county 4 times a year, having heard all the recent cases, having talked about them, and now they go to a court and say, well, I heard down here in Kent, We understand that you've got this situation which is unique for you, but up in Northumberland, we had similar case, and this is how it was decided. So essentially, um, these two knights who the king would dispatch to each county 4 times a year would essentially be bringing what the law is now, what has been decided in other places, and they would administer the law along with 4 knights of the county elected by the county itself. Um, that's a little sticky because they don't have regular elections in Trial 15, but they do have kind of a way of selecting people and putting them forward. So the county, which was controlled usually by a very small number of people, would put forward their own justices from the local region to work with the king's justices. Shall hold the assizes in the county court. So it's going to be held, where the place is. And notice this on the day. So not only do you get the location, but you get the day in which it's going to be, and in the place where the court meets. So again, this justice is supposed to be regular, dependable. You're supposed to taking all these other things, like who gets to kill whom, out of the hands of the people. Although certainly through the election of justices in counties, it's not completely out of the hands of people. And get it into the hands of legal professionals. Now, one thing of the things we'll talk about in a later video is the fact that the jury system at this point, the jury system begins in the 900s, maybe even earlier. But we'll talk about how the jury system functioned in 1215 because there is a jury system. And so most justice, not all, most justice is local justice, and it's dispensed by people with local accords. And so when we look at just the summaries of Articles 40, 17, and 18, you have a right to justice. You have a right to a fixed, known place for court proceedings. You have a right to have a court determine who legally possess land, or the right to an office, to nominate someone for an office. And you have a regular, which means by the rules, and dependable justice system. So, this is, again, all they were doing was saying this is how things are when things are working properly, and this is how they should be. So while certainly the barons who ran John to ground were not out there being revolutionaries, what they were doing was creating a constitution. I've said this before. And, of course, the means by which to sustain that constitution. Now, they didn't think in those terms, but that's what they were doing. And, of course, these constitutional ideas are going to go on to the present in English-speaking and English-influenced areas. I think I think that those of us who live in English-speaking or English-influenced areas can be fairly proud of what these barons and church people accomplished. It's a heck of a lot better to have a court decide your fate than to have Joe Stalin decide your fate. You're probably going to get a better deal from people who live close to you. So anyway, everybody out there, take care, stay safe, stay healthy. Okay, and we'll all meet again before this is over. Bye-bye.